So you've probably heard about the woman, life, freedom protests that swept across Iran. Well, in the wake of all that, the United Nations set up a special mission, an independent fact-finding mission, to dig into the alleged human rights violations. In this explainer, we're going to break down the key findings from their report. And let me tell you, it's comprehensive and it's deeply troubling.
Before we dive into the data and the legal stuff, I think it's crucial we start right here with this quote. "At least I will die with a purpose." This was said by a woman protester who was subjected to a mock execution. It's right there in the UN report, and it really grounds this entire conversation in the very real, very human experiences at the heart of this whole investigation.
Okay, so how did the mission even begin to tackle something this massive? Well, a good way to understand their process is to look at a single emblematic case. We're going to talk about the death of a 16-year-old girl named Nika Shakarami. Her story, tragically, became a powerful symbol of the entire protest movement. And when you put the two stories side by side, wow, the contrast is just stark. The official state account, they claimed Nika Shakarami died by suicide. But the UN mission, after digging through all the available evidence, they came to a very different conclusion. They found she didn't commit suicide. She was killed. They also found the official investigation was a mess. It lacked transparency, they obstructed the family's efforts, and key evidence like a forensic report was just missing. The mission concluded that the evidence actually points towards state involvement in her killing. And this right here, this huge clash between the official story and the facts on the ground, this is a pattern the mission found over and over again.
And that's the really crucial point here. Nika's story is heartbreaking, but the report makes it clear that her case wasn't just some isolated, tragic incident. No, it was part of a much, much larger picture. A pattern of widespread, systemic repression that the UN mission documented across the entire country.
So, let's talk scale. This number, 853, what is that? According to the UN report, that's the total number of people executed in Iran in 2023, just in 1 year. To put that in perspective, it's the highest number recorded in the last 8 years. It signals a really dramatic escalation in the state's use of the death penalty.
And you can really see that escalation right here. I mean, look at this chart. The report highlights a staggering 172% increase in executions since just 2021. And the mission draws a direct line from the sharp rise to the period right after the Woman Life Freedom protests began. The implication is pretty clear. This wasn't just routine justice. It was being used as a tool to instill fear and completely crush dissent.
But it gets even more specific. The report found that this spike in executions wasn't applied evenly across the population. Not at all. Ethnic minorities were disproportionately targeted. Take the Baluch minority, for example. They make up only about 2% of Iran's population, but they accounted for a shocking 20% of all executions in 2023. That is a massive overrepresentation. This, the report says, points to some really deep-seated discrimination baked right into the justice system.
Okay, so we've talked about physical violence, we've talked about executions, but the repression that the UN mission documented, it went way beyond that. The state also used this whole sophisticated toolkit of control, aimed at silencing its citizens in pretty much every aspect of their lives.
And a huge part of that control was in the digital world. I mean, this is some next-level stuff. The mission found it went way beyond just shutting down the internet. We're talking about deactivating people's SIM cards, seizing their Instagram accounts by judicial order, and even forcing people to use state-controlled apps for everyday services. The result? A constant, pervasive environment of surveillance, where you're always being watched.
And the pressure didn't just stop with the protesters themselves. The report details a really cruel and systematic campaign against their families and their supporters. Think about this. They were arresting family members for simply trying to hold a memorial service. They were firing people from their jobs, trying to isolate them economically. And they were intimidating anyone, journalists, lawyers, even doctors, who dared to offer any kind of support. This wasn't just about punishing an individual. It was a strategy designed to silence entire communities through fear and isolation.
So, a huge focus of the UN's report is the role of the judiciary itself. And what the mission found is pretty damning. It's not just that the legal system was failing to provide justice, it was actually being used as a primary weapon of repression.
To really get this, we need to understand a specific legal term, maharebe. It's a charge in the Islamic Penal Code, and it's often translated as waging war against God. Now, you might think that sounds like it's for something really extreme, but the report points out its definition is dangerously broad. It can be applied for acts as simple as brandishing a weapon to create public fear, even if no one gets hurt.
And because it can carry the death penalty, it becomes an incredibly powerful and flexible tool to use against protesters.
So the mission basically mapped out this clear and, frankly, disturbing pathway from the street to the gallows. It's like a conveyor belt. It starts with an arbitrary arrest, then it moves to torture and ill treatment to force a confession. During all this, you're denied access to a lawyer of your own choosing. And then, those coerced confessions are used in these super-fast trials that completely lack due process, all leading to incredibly harsh sentences, including death. The report's conclusion on this is blunt. Fair trial guarantees were systematically violated every step of the way.
Okay, so with all of this evidence, the killings, the torture, the persecution through the legal system, the mission was tasked with answering a huge, critical question under international law. Do all these violations rise to the level of the most serious crimes imaginable?
And this was the central legal question they had to answer. Do these acts constitute crimes against humanity? This is why they gathered thousands of pieces of evidence and witness testimonies. They weren't just trying to document individual human rights violations. They were trying to determine if all of this was part of a widespread and systematic attack directed against the civilian population.
And what did they find? The investigation uncovered evidence of murder, imprisonment, torture, rape, and other forms of sexual violence, persecution based on gender and political opinion, the list goes on. But here's the key legal finding. It wasn't just that these awful things happened. It was that they were part of a coordinated state policy. That exact phrase, a widespread and systematic attack.
And that leads us to the report's ultimate, devastating conclusion. Based on all the evidence, the mission found there are reasonable grounds to believe that the Islamic Republic of Iran committed crimes against humanity. Let's just sit with that for a second. This is one of the most serious findings that can be made under international law. It carries immense, immense weight.
A finding that serious can't just be a piece of paper. It demands action. So the final part of the report shifts gears. It moves from documenting the past to recommending a path forward. It's a clear and urgent call for accountability. The report's recommendations start with the Iranian government itself. The UN is calling for some immediate and major changes. Halt all executions right now. Repeal the mandatory hijab laws. Release every single person who is arbitrarily detained just for exercising their rights. And crucially, they're calling for the state to investigate its own officials and provide real reparations to victims and their families.
But recognizing that justice might not come from within, the mission also made some really strong recommendations to the rest of the world, to the international community. It's calling on other countries to create an independent accountability mechanism, to apply what's called universal jurisdiction to prosecute alleged perpetrators in their own national courts, to set up an international fund for victims, and to grant asylum and provide support to those who are fleeing persecution.
So the mission has done its work. It's presented the facts, it's laid out a path for justice. But its report leaves all of us with a final, incredibly powerful question. What is the world's responsibility when a state is found to have committed crimes against its own people? That's not just an academic inquiry. It's a challenge to the entire international community. And it's a question that now really hangs over all of us.